Hi, welcome to another episode of The Amanda Show. My name is Amanda Akalonu, and on this show, as usual, we'll be discussing about three major news stories coming out of Africa, and I want us to dive into it. First, um, I want us to take a closer look at how the proposed G7 ban on Russia's diamonds, how it affects Africa, because something happened a few months ago, and it made me realize how something as simple as banning Russian diamonds, you would think that it doesn't affect Africa, but it does. So we are going to discuss that today. Secondly, we'll move over to the Democratic Republic of Congo. So a news story came out this week that United States um, made an effort to block the sale of a copper mine in DRC to China. I thought it was a very interesting topic when I saw it. I want us to shed some light on this news story and as always, give my opinion. And for the last story today, we go all the way to Nigeria. So, the president of Nigeria just signed an EU-backed agreement. It's called the Samoa Agreement, and it's raising up a lot of storm in the country. I wanted us to take a closer look at this, and also, as always, I wanted to highlight certain things, not just in the agreement, but also in our relations with international players. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and let's jump into the stories. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2022, we have seen a slew of sanctions thrown against the country. The idea of the sanctions is supposed to cripple Russia's war chest so that they cannot continue to engage in a military activity in Ukraine. Now, we've seen ban against a lot of goods from Russia. A lot of Russian businesses have been sanctioned, individuals. And so, one of the biggest things that have been the conversation has been revolving around is sanctioning Russian diamonds. So, it was supposed to kick off in this year in January, but um certain things happened that is stalled. So 2 weeks ago, there was an event in Paris with the idea of setting up vaccine plants across Africa so that in case there is any pandemic, Africa can be able to produce their own vaccines. I'm not going to talk about that project today, but I'm just highlighting it because during that event, the president of Botswana, Matisi, met with on the sidelines with France 24 TV station, and they had a conversation. And one of the things they discussed about was the sanctions against Russian diamonds and how it affects Botswana and African countries in general. So apparently, a few months ago, after the sanctions were supposed to kick off, and then I believe the diamond industry was pushing back against that a bit, but the president of Botswana, Masisi, along with Namibia and Angola, they wrote a letter to the G7 saying that it shouldn't proceed. Because let me tell you why. Now, the idea of that sanction against Russia, or Russian diamonds, is supposed to, it required that any diamond sold within the G7 countries would have to pass through Antwerp in Belgium for certification. Interesting. So Botswana, the government of Botswana, Namibia, and Angola pushed back against it because they said this is I'm looking for a really nice word. This is disrespectful to them because they are the producers of this diamond. So you cannot go. Interestingly, let me not forget. So this was set in place without consulting diamond producers. You want to, the idea is to sanction Russia, okay, but you're not sanctioning Namibia, you're not sanctioning Angola, you're not sanctioning Botswana. But then this policy directly affects not just even these countries in Africa, but also countries like India that is known for polishing diamonds and the UAE. So this letter was sent from Africa to the G7, stating that I'm paraphrasing, but it's disrespectful that they weren't considered and blah blah blah. So it made me begin to think of the current structure of the global economy. I thought it was quite interesting that a country like Belgium that does not have diamonds is set up to this policy, this G7 policy, was propping Belgium up to be the determinant of which diamonds go into, in effect, go into the market. Quite right, it's just the G7 market, but we also know that the G7 countries are very influential and they are financially buoyant. They're quite rich. They are very rich countries. So everybody wants to break into that market. Now, how is it that a country like Belgium will decide which diamonds go into the global supply chain without the consultation of the diamond producers? For example, a country like Botswana, Botswana's income has skyrocketed in the past decades. In fact, it's one of the high income, it's not generally high income on a global stage, but within Africa, it's one of the high income countries on the continent. And this is primarily due to diamonds. This is primarily due to diamonds. And in fact, Botswana is a very good example of how a country's natural resources can benefit the people and the country at large. So this is primarily due to diamonds. So if the G7 would proceed with this sanctioning Russian diamonds, which secondarily would sanction other producers, if the G7 proceeds with this, it's going to affect Botswana's economy as well as that of Angola and Namibia. So that was why they sent out this letter. So I began to think about the state of Africa, not just Africa really, but the way the global economy is positioned with respect to Africa. Now, I have a question. Is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? That was one of the questions that was running through my mind. Because if the G7 can so easily, like that, with one policy, strangulate the economy of Botswana, or at least really, really give a heavy dent to the economy of Botswana that is primarily focused on diamonds, and countries like Angola and Namibia. What else is in balance in our global system? What else is in balance in our global system? Because yes, like I mentioned earlier, the G7, they have heavy purchasing power. So we, of course, Africa wants to sell our resources to other countries, particularly United States, Europe, and the rest of them. But if they can so easily give it such a dent to our economy, so don't you think that it's important for we in Africa to begin to think of creating alternative markets, particularly within the continent? Now, speaking of sanctions against Russia, we all know that Russia has received thousands of sanctions, tens of thousands of sanctions, maybe even at this point, maybe even 1 million, maybe even 1 million sanctions. So we already know that. But regardless of all the sanctions that have been thrown against Russia, Russia's economy is growing. This year, we saw that on a purchasing power parity basis, Russia is the number one economy in Europe. That means Russia has outperformed even Japan. It's number four in the world now. So on a PPP basis, it's China, United States, India, and Russia. So Russia has outperformed Germany. It has outperformed Japan. Other than that, also this year, last week or 2 weeks ago, the World the World Bank, was it either the World Bank or the IMF, one of the two, I can't remember which one, but has increased Russia's standing and saying that today Russia is now a high income country. Russia is no longer a middle income country. Russia has been a middle income country for a very long time, but as at this 2024, it's now a high income country. This is in spite of sanctions. So how was Russia able to should I how was Russia able to defeat these sanctions, these economic sanctions? Because Russia found other buyers of of its goods and services. When Europe said we're not going to buy Russian oil, although they are still quietly buying Russia's oil, but when Europe said we're no longer going to buy Russia's oil and Russia's gas, Russia found a market in India. Russia found a market in China. Interestingly, India buys Russia. India will buy Russia's oil, refine it, and sell it to Europe. At, at, and sell it to Europe at a lot more expensive rate. Europe buys it. So what I'm saying is that one of the reasons Russia was able to defeat the sanctions thrown at it was because Russia found alternative sources or alternative markets to buy its products. Coming back to Africa, as the world is changing and things are quickly shifting, Africa, we also need to keep in mind that we need to create alternative market sources. Yes, at the end of the day, we still want to sell our goods to Europe and United States and Canada and Latin America, everywhere around the world. But we still need a healthy market within the continent. Shamefully, our trade within the countries of Africa, I think it's about 20% or less, the lowest in the world. Look at Europe. Europe is trading within themselves. European countries are trading within themselves to almost 80%. In Latin America, it's a heavy, heavy, heavy fraction of their trade. But in Africa, our trade is more with outsiders than it is within ourselves. So these are the things that I'm seeing. And one of the things that was coming to my mind when I was listening to that interview, President Masisi's interview with France 24, is that in as much as we want to sell our goods and services to countries outside of the continent, we also need to increase trade within ourselves. If for some reason Nigeria offends the G7 and the G7 says they're not going to buy Nigeria's oil, that that is a heavy blow to Nigeria's economy, a very terrible blow to Nigeria's economy. But if Nigeria was also had a healthy market within the continent, even if the G7 says they're not going to buy Nigeria's oil, this is I'm not saying that G7 says it's not going to buy Nigeria's oil. This is just me giving a hypothetical situation. But if, in that situation, even if the G7 says they're not going to buy Nigeria's oil, it may give a dent. But because Nigeria already has a healthy market within the continent, Nigeria can still earn sensible revenue because of the other people it trades with. Do you get where I'm coming from with this? It reminds me of something that happened with cocoa. So we already know that Ghana, Ivory Coast are two of the top producers of cocoa in the world. So cocoa is cacao. Cacao. That's what you used to calling cocoa. So cacao is one of their major exports, right? So the farmers who produce this cacao, compared to the global supply chain and how much the industry is actually worth, they make pennies. And I think this is also part of the residue of colonialism, where Africa was just used for as a natural resource extraction point, where they extract natural resources. But anyway, the farmers make pennies, almost nothing, compared to how much the global cacao industry is, how much it's worth. So the government of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire decided to do something about it and said, okay, they created a benchmark. We're trying to determine the price of the cacao going to for export to the global supply chain. Now that price they put was recognized for some time. Then after a while, the international buyers started buying cacao from those countries below that price, and the government couldn't really do anything about it because if they try to enforce that, and these outside buyers say okay they are not going to buy, that means the farmers are left with this cacao, no buyer. Do you get where I'm coming from? So at the end of the day, that also affects the economy and the output of those countries. So when the international players began to buy it less than the price that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the governments of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire enforced or tried to enforce, the government really couldn't do anything because you can't say no, don't sell. If you say no, don't sell, who are you going to sell to? I get I guess you see where I'm coming with this. What are you going to sell to? The international players say they're not going to buy at say 2 cents. You say, oh, it has to be 2 cents. The international buyers say no, they're going to buy it at 1 cent. You insist 2 cents. They say okay, they'll go to Indonesia or some other places to buy this thing. If they go to Indonesia and other places to buy at 1 cent, you're left with your product. And because you don't have any other place to sell these things, you're the bigger loser. So I've been really thinking, and I realized that Africa needs to have a healthy market for this many of our products. We need a healthy market within the continent. We need to have businesses within the continent that can buy our resources, at least cushion, help give, you know, offer a cushion in case outsiders decide to do anything. It won't hurt us so much where we know that we can still sell within the continent. We need more businesses that can come on the scene to become heavy players in respective industry, especially industries that use our minerals. So for example, why can't we have a lot of industries within Africa who use diamonds? So Botswana not just selling to the G7 countries, Botswana will also sell to other Botswana, Angola, Zambia would also sell to Namibia, not Zambia, Namibia would also sell to other African countries who have heavy industries that need diamonds. We also need big jewelers, people who create amazing high jewelry using our diamonds, using our sapphires. using our emeralds. Zambia emeralds are one of the most beautiful emeralds in the world. Nigeria has the second best sapphires in the world. We need businesses that will use these things because at the end of the day, it not only benefits us, meaning that we can have alternative markets, but it also adds to the economy of the respective countries and the continents at large. So instead of exporting just natural resources, we are creating finished goods. Say, let's use the jewelry industry as an example. Instead of exporting gemstones, because many African countries they even export rough gemstones, not even polished gemstones. I'm going to give you an example. India, look at India. For a very long time, Antwerp was the center of the diamond industry in the world. But now India has taken over. India is now the center of the diamond trade, especially for polishing diamonds. Then Dubai is the center for trading diamonds. It used to be Antwerp. It's not Antwerp anymore, to the best of my knowledge. I'll check that just in case I'm wrong. But it's not Antwerp, to the best of my knowledge. It's not Antwerp anymore. India has come on the scene because India has diamonds. In fact, before the discovery of diamonds in South Africa in the 1800s, where was India was the place people went to get diamonds. But for many years, or even centuries, they used India as a place to just go and get it. Until now that India is asserting itself as a global player for polished diamonds. Not just diamonds, polished gemstones in general. How much has that added to India's economy? Billions of dollars. So you see why India is worth trillions of dollars? Because all these areas are places you can extract good money from. So bringing it back to Africa, instead of Africa to be a place to just take rough diamonds to the global market and then have it polished in Antwerp or have it polished in India and sold in Dubai, let us begin to and it doesn't really I know sometimes we say it has to it's our governments are dragging their feet and all of that. Well, I really don't think it so much has to do with the government as it has to do with the people. India, as an example, the catalyst for asserting India as a dominant place for polishing diamonds wasn't so much with a lot of efforts from the government. It actually took the people themselves. The people themselves, because there was a documentary I watched some years ago. No, it wasn't years ago. It was actually it wasn't that far. I think it was 2022. I watched or 2023. I watched that documentary, and the documentary tried to it showed how India became such and it has I'm so impressed with what India has done. How India became a formidable player in the diamond industry. It just was some Indians in Antwerp and they saw that Antwerp was a place for polishing diamonds. So India went there. These Indians were already in Antwerp polishing diamonds, but then they realized that these players in Antwerp were more focused on big diamonds compared to Melee, like tiny, tiny. They call it diamond dust or diamond sand or Melee diamonds. So those are the smaller ones. So these guys decided to start polishing smaller diamonds, and they were even polishing smaller diamonds in Antwerp. They took it to India and they called their really like not really related, but people within from that community called them. They taught them how to polish diamonds. They brought the what's the word? The equipment needed. They brought the knowledge and had the people do it. So they continue doing the big ones in Antwerp. But when people say, "Oh, we want to polish and we want to polish diamonds and the small one," they would direct them to India. So that was how India got into the global supply chain. So these are the way we need to begin to think in Africa. Quite all right, you can say, well, our governments are not serious, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we as individuals, what are we doing? What are we doing? Let's look at this diamond thing. Imagine if the G7, because it's supposed to take effect, this G7 diamond ban, they gave themselves a timeline to take effect from the 1st of September 2024. So we are still some months away, 2 months away to be precise. So if this kind of thing takes effect, what kind of damage will it do to Botswana? Because Botswana, this letter they sent to the G7, they haven't gotten a response. What if they don't get a response and the G7 proceeds with this thing? Africa is damaged. Africa is hurt. Look at Botswana that was coming out of poverty thanks to their diamonds. This would then impede their growth. So, like I said, we need to begin to think differently. We need to begin to think differently. What can we do as a continent to use our natural resources for our own benefit? How can we create markets within the continent, right? How can we create markets within the continent to cushion the effects of anything external players may decide to do? We need more businesses. We need more heavy funded businesses to come into to come into the supply chain of of our minerals and our resources. For example, we need more businesses within the cocoa industry. Why can't we have more businesses producing chocolates so that we are not so reliant on outsiders, on Cadbury, on Mars, on Hershey's? Right now, they are the biggest players, but we can give ourselves a target 20 years. By 20 years, we should be able to have like three businesses in Africa that can really say, okay, we are buying a large chunk of whatever is produced in Ghana, in Ivory Coast, in Nigeria, because Nigeria also produces cocoa. I think Nigeria is number four in the world. Yes, number four, number five in the world. So we can begin to use, we need more businesses who are going to use our resources. We need more businesses who are going to use our diamonds. We need more businesses who are going to use our oil, who are going to use our cobalt and the rest of them. So this is where I want us to begin to think. You as you're watching me now, what can you do? Which area can you get into? How can you structure your business so that what we have in Africa can benefit we in Africa, regardless of what outsiders decide to do? So from the diamond conversation in Botswana and Namibia and Angola, we come to DRC. There's a news that dropped this week that the United States tried to block a copper mine in DRC, block a Chinese business from buying that copper mine. So when I saw this news, it made me think and think hard. Here's the thing: if you've been following geopolitics, you know that there's currently tension between the U.S., China, and Russia on the geopolitics stage. So China has asserted itself as a world power. China is a world power. So China has asserted itself as a world power. Russia has come back on the scene. There was a time Russia was a world power under the USSR. Then it went through a really dark period. But now Russia under Vladimir Putin has asserted itself again as a world power. So it's a formidable player. And United States, that was the absolute world power for several decades, seems to be its influence seems to be dwindling. So it's trying to counter any threats to its global hegemony, like anything that's threatening it from being number one. So that's the geopolitical game that has been playing. So one of the effects of this is that we are going to see the US try to counter in several episodes, for example, of the Amanda show. I mentioned that says that they need to counter Russia and China's propaganda in Africa. So therefore, they need to give us more American propaganda. Well, so we're going to see more things like this, where the United States is countering Russia and China in different areas around the world. So this story now of US blocking, attempting to block China's purchase of a copper mine in DRC is really because United States does not want these rare earth minerals, particularly the rare earth minerals needed for today's the whole green agenda and the rest of it. So particularly this kind of rare earth minerals, US is trying to stop China from being a big player in that industry, which China already is, by the way, because for example, with the electric cars, China is already has overtaken the world. So that's what's happened. Now, I want to read a quote from Financial Times about the situation. I'll read the quote, then get into what I want to say about it. So the quote, according to Financial Times, this blocking of China, this stop trying to stop China purchasing a mine in DRC. According to Financial Times, the move is part of Washington's efforts to improve access to metals for US friendly companies amid increasingly fierce competition between the West and China for control of the minerals needed for clean energy infrastructure. Listen, one, US wants to improve access for US friendly companies, underlined. US friendly companies. The next thing I want you to see, this whole thing is amid increasing fierce competition between the West, listen, between the West and China for control of the minerals needed for clean energy infrastructure. control of the minerals. Where are many of these minerals situated? In Africa. So this whole geopolitical game is playing where? Over Africa. Over Africa. They are saying they want to control minerals needed for clean energy infrastructure. United States wants to put these minerals in the hands of US friendly companies to control. Meanwhile, the minerals are in your country. They're in DRC. This one I explained not in DRC. They're in DRC. They're in South Africa. They're in Nigeria. They're in Ethiopia. They're in Egypt. They're all across the continent. They're in Botswana. Like our previous segment, we spoke about Botswana and the diamond industry. So these minerals are all across Africa. And they are talking about controlling it. And they're not mentioning you. They're not asking you the part you play. Then nobody's asking you, not United States, not China. They're not asking you the role you play. Understand the way this geopolitical game is played. It's for control, for the minerals under your feet. And nobody tried to consult you to say, okay, what do you think about it? Very interesting. It reminds me of the attempted coup in Bolivia last week or 2 weeks, well, just either last week or 2 weeks ago. So there was an attempted coup. It failed. But when the president of Bolivia was talking about it, one of the things he said he knows that the attempted coup to remove him from office was because of Bolivia's rich lithium reserves. I believe Bolivia is number one lithium producer in the world. So this coup was to remove his government because certain people were looking at it like his government was not favorable to them so that they can control Bolivia's lithium. His government was not being favorable. It was favoring some other people. So they tried to remove him so that they can bring in somebody who would favor him, who would favor them rather, in advancing their quest to control minerals. Let me buttress this point with something that happened some weeks ago. So a few weeks ago, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, I believe he's from Carolina. Yes, South Carolina. He was on a network in the United States talking about the minerals in Ukraine. And something that he said struck me. So he said boldly on international TV that Ukraine has trillions of dollars worth of minerals. And the United States should not let those minerals get into the control of Russia because Russia will share with China. Nobody was talking about the Ukrainians. Nobody was, sometimes when you see things like this, especially things that this geopolitical game, you would think that at the very least, the people of the country should be a consideration. But I want to tell you today that the people of the countries are not a consideration when they are thinking of how they become the biggest players in green, because anybody who can control this green energy game now is the person is that country is set. So when they're thinking of how to control this green energy game, nobody is thinking about the people. So Lindsey Graham went on international TV to say that United States needs to make sure that it stays with Ukraine because it needs to control the resources of Ukraine so that these resources don't get into the hands of Russia, who will then share with China. I'll play the video for you to watch. I wish I can find it. If I can find it, I'll play it for you to watch.
What did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin 10 or 12 trillion dollars of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
I want. So when you see things like this, many times when you see things like this, it's a geopolitical game. Nobody is thinking about the people of the country. All the countries, these big global players like US, Russia, China, Europe, and the rest of them, they're looking for how to assert themselves in fact, to ensure that they continue to be the center of of global affairs. How is it? Before I move on, before I move on to what I wanted to say. So Ukraine now, Lindsey Graham said Ukraine has trillions of dollars worth of minerals, which is true. But even with trillions of dollars worth of minerals, Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe. And it's not just because of the war. Even before the war, Ukraine has been one of the poorest countries in Europe. Even if it had trillions of dollars worth of minerals. The same thing with the DRC. The DRC is according to several experts, DRC is the richest country in the world when it comes to mineral resources. It's the richest in the world. Yet the DRC is one of the poorest countries in the world. How can you be the richest country with minerals, critical minerals that the world needs in today's world? You have abundance of it. Yet, yet you're one of the poorest countries in the world. A lot of these things have been, I've said it several times, these are residues of colonialism, of Africa being just a place to extract raw materials, which is why we need to change it. We don't have to wait for our government because sometimes your government might have a different agenda. The government may have a very different agenda. So, but because it affects us directly, I've told you now, I mentioned it just a few seconds ago, a while ago, I mentioned it that when this geopolitical game is being played at, on many occasions, they're not thinking of the people of the country. They are thinking of their own standing on the global stage. So the question now is, we in Africa, what are we going to do about it? Because we cannot be relying on just our government. A different respective government may have their own thing they are doing, but we are the people, with the people. It's for our benefit to decide what we want to do with Africa and the resources and the minerals that we have. It's in our own good to decide it. Because I'm thinking of the audacity. But there's a kind of audacity you can have when you have been the center of the world for several decades. Because I'm thinking, United States left its country, thousands of miles left its country to stop China, a Chinese company, from buying a mine in the DRC. Why? Because China is not US friend. So they want to put this critical infrastructure, these critical minerals in the hands of companies and countries that are favorite companies from countries that are friends of the United States. And all this game is played on top of your head in Africa. Now, I'm not fighting the US, so everybody is going to do what is in their interest. What is in Africa, now it is up to us to decide what is in Africa's interest. Because if we say, oh, China is our friend, we're only going to follow China, or Russia is our friend, we're only going to follow Russia, or the United States is our friend, we're only going to follow the US, you then sell out your country to these other players. What then happens to your own country and the people in your country? So I'm not saying you should take sides. I'm saying that we should decide who we want to sell our minerals to. We should decide who we want to partner with. We partner with the US, we partner with China, we partner with Russia, we partner with Europe, we partner with Latin America, with everybody. But in as much as we are doing all these things, so let's not forget that the target is dominance in this era of clean energy. And many of the minerals needed for this clean energy transition and many of the minerals needed for the clean energy infrastructure are in the continent of Africa. Is in your country and in my country. So what's the question? How is this in Africa's interest? That is what we should be asking ourselves. It's not just about selling our mines and our minerals to outsiders. Don't we want to be players in this thing? I'm saying that Africa doesn't even, we don't need to be just a place for extraction and exploitation of minerals. Enough. We're not going to be that anymore. We are not going to be that. Africa will not be that anymore. We want to play. Is it a bad thing? Is it a bad thing for the black skin to play in this game? Hmm? It's not a bad thing. We know what they're using our cobalts to do. We know. We know what they're using our coppers to do. We know what they're using our iron ore to do. We know what they're using our diamonds to do. We know what they're using our gas and natural gas to do. We know. So we need to begin to play in this game. The geopolitical game is not foreign to we in Africa. It's not foreign to us in Africa. It's not. Our minds can comprehend it. We know they're using it to do electric cars. So we too we are going to create our own electric cars. We know they're using it to make mobile phones. We too we are going to make our own mobile phones. We know they're using it to make batteries. Why can't we create our own batteries? Why can't we create our own batteries? Is there something wrong with made in Nigeria battery or made in South Africa battery? Is there something wrong with it? So when you see things like this, you should not just be thinking of, oh no, we are going to sell to only China. No, 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 we are going to play. I want to let Africa, we need to become players in this game. The game is not foreign to Africans. It's not foreign to the black skin. Our brains can comprehend it. It's not foreign to us. I read it to you just now from the Financial Times that US is looking to put these infrastructures within these critical minerals within US friendly countries for control. The word the Financial Times used was control. Our own resources is our own. Is our own. So what am I saying? I'm saying we should begin to play in this game. The game is not foreign to us. We know we understand what they're using it to make. We understand. Have you been to China? You've seen what China is doing with with electric cars. We too. Let us have an agenda. And like I know, as I'm saying this, most people are probably thinking, oh, let us just make it. It's just because our government. If we keep giving ourselves excuse for government, we'll not get anything done. Since I was born, I've been hearing government, 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 government. And so if we now we have who have come on the scene at this point, if we keep giving holding the government responsible, we would still we will, our children are going to inherit this same nonsense. So that our children don't inherit the nonsense we inherited from our parents. Let us say, okay, if our government has not been doing that, let's assume they're going to keep acting like this. How are we individuals, we the public, how can we come into play? That's how we need to begin to think in Africa. We need to begin to think about becoming players in this game. Because who says that Africa, the only thing we are good for is to export raw materials? Who said it? Who said it? I don't see any law anywhere. If an outsider, maybe a country outside, decides that okay, this is what we are going to use Africa for, have we agreed that that is what we are going to be used for? They can say they want to use Africa as a place for just exploiting minerals. We would say no, we are not going to be for just exploiting minerals. We can insist that that's not that the game will play. So then we then begin to think, how can we come in? Quite right. Russia has really advanced, and China has really advanced, and the United States has advanced. But that does not mean we cannot be. I mentioned in the last segment how the whole world, Antwerp was the center of the diamond game. But India has become the center of the diamond game. Dubai has become center of the diamond game. Why? Because people thought outside the box. It wasn't just about the government. Individuals came in to see how they can play in this thing. So I'm advocating for we in Africa to begin to do that. These are our minerals. The diamond belongs to us. The copper is ours. The copper mine is probably in your village. The lithium mine is probably in your village. The oil wells are probably in your village. The natural gas locations are probably in your village. The sapphires and diamonds and rubies in your village. It's in your village. It's in your country. So who says you cannot become a player in this thing? So that's what I want us to in this segment. That's what I want us to do. I want this segment. That's what I want to convey. The message I want to pass is that we need to begin to think about how we can become players. I mentioned it in the last segment that we did when we were talking about Botswana and the whole diamond G7 diamond band something. I mentioned it. How why can't we? Must we wait for Cadbury and Mars to come and buy our cacao? Why can't we use our own cacao? Why can't we? Because if we leave it the way it is, the global system, the way it's set up, is not set up to benefit Africa. It's not. Don't deceive yourself. The way the global economy is played is not set up to benefit Africa because we've had centuries of colonization where Africa was just a place to collect raw materials. That was what we had. So we need to change that system. But we cannot be waiting for them outside because it benefits them. Because if they just get raw materials from us, it's cheap. It's really cheap for them. But it's not in our benefit. So when you see our interests and their interests are clashing like this, you will follow through in your own interests. Because, like I said, the global system is set up. The way it is set up is not set up to benefit Africa. Africa is just supposed to be the place to collect raw materials and go. It's not supposed to be the place to process it because you make more money when you process this thing to sell, when you sell out finished products. Let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, um the richest man okay yes the richest man in Africa for a while, but right now I believe he has been unseated by somebody in South Africa. But Aliko Dangote. We all know that last year, Aliko Dangote launched his refinery. The idea is supposed to be like Nigeria should no longer, in fact, Africa should no longer be a place for just collecting oil. We also need to refine our oil and export finished products, which makes sense. That way, Nigeria makes more money. But he said something a few weeks ago. He said he he spoke about an oil cartel, an oil cabal that has been trying to stifle I'm paraphrasing, that have been trying to stifle the growth of his country. Like, for example, Nigeria, normally, Nigeria has oil. Nigeria is one of the largest producers of oil on the continent, in the world too. So Nigeria has a lot of oil, right? But a lot of crude oil. But Dangote, when he mentioned the cabal is stopping him. I'm paraphrasing, like I said, I don't want to go into the full details. The cabal is stopping the Dangote group from buying crude oil from Nigeria to refine and sell finished products. So instead, the Dangote refinery is buying crude oil from the United States. Why? Like I said, all these things are residue of colonialism. Does it make sense? A country, a business is resident in Nigeria, operates in Nigeria. The business is an oil refinery in Nigeria that has abundance of crude oil. Instead of getting crude oil from the country where you operate, because it'll be cheaper for you, it's buying crude oil from the United States. Why? The oil cabal. And this oil cabal has it. And oil cabal, he said the players are both within the country, that is Nigeria, and outside the country. What I want to say is that this cabal has existed for centuries. Why? Because it is Africa's job is just to be a place to export raw materials, not the place to refine it, not a place to manufacture and produce finished goods. But if that is going to change, if that story of Africa is going to change, me and you would have to decide that we're not going to play that game. We have to decide by ourselves that we're not going to play that game. We are going to refine our minerals here. We are going to produce finished goods here. But we don't have to wait for our government. Learn from what India did with diamonds. We need to learn from what India did with diamonds and decide that we are going to use our minerals by ourselves. We are going to turn it to finished products by ourselves. We are going to export finished goods by ourselves. That is the only way. That is the only way to bring Africa out of poverty. So while the United States is stopping the DRC from selling copper mines to China because China is not US friend, let the DRC also remember that these minerals belong to the DRC. So the DRC needs to also find a way to play in that game beyond just a place to collect raw materials. And this lesson should move to other countries in Africa as well. And now we come to our final topic for today. There's this story that has been making waves in Nigeria, and I want us to discuss that. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, he signed the Samoa Agreement, EU-backed Samoa Agreement. Now, I can't really say exactly what it is because the government has not released it to the public. So until the government releases it to the public, I cannot give a complete and accurate analysis of that agreement. But then I have seen some clips circulating online that purporting to be from the agreement, but I don't know if it's from the agreement. I'm stating this clearly. I don't know if it's from the agreement, but I'm seeing some clips, some segments, sections purporting to be from the agreement, and it seems to advocate for the LGBTQ rights. Now, the Samoa Agreement, what we have seen is for LGBTQ rights within Africa and the Caribbean countries for money. So it's also going to make these countries have access to money, but with conditionalities. And one of the alleged conditionalities is for LGBTQ rights to be recognized in the respective countries that sign up to this agreement. Here's what I want to say about this, that outsiders can come in to literally change your culture, your country, your your values, change all these things in the name of money. And that's a dangerous place for Africa to be. Now, I want to say this here that I don't have a problem with anybody's right. Everybody, I believe that human rights should be across all boards. You can't treat some people better than some others. because they're a certain way or they believe certain things. Human rights should go across the board. But having said that, this idea of being able for external players to be able to change your values, your culture, and your country in general in the name of money is a terrible thing. It's a very terrible thing. It reminds me of what happened back in the administration of President Goodluck Jonathan. This is the same way the United States was putting pressure on Nigeria for gay rights. That the president then, that's Goodluck Jonathan, had to sign a law making it had to make sign a law making homosexuality illegal in Nigeria. Because you cannot come if something is sacred to you as an outsider, fine. But that doesn't mean it's sacred to your another country you're going to do deal in business with. Doesn't necessarily mean it's sacred to them. So we should be able to respect its country's values and systems and culture, and not try to impose your own ideology and your own way of life on another country. It's disrespectful because in your mind you feel that your own value and your own culture is superior to that person's culture. That is why you think it's okay to come into a country and tell them to behave like you because you think that the way they behave is primitive. It's disrespectful. It's very disrespectful. They did this. The United States under Barack Obama did this thing with Nigeria that Jonathan had to sign the anti-homosexuality law, and when he signed it, US punished Nigeria. In fact, back then Nigeria was having the issue with Boko Haram, and Boko Haram had claimed several communities and set up bases there and chased out the villagers. In fact, it was more like Boko Haram County in those communities. Nigeria needed weapons to be able to for the military to be able to fight Boko Haram. United States did not sell weapons to Nigeria because of the homosexuality act that was signed into law by Jonathan. Because of that, United States did not give weapons to Nigeria. The same thing that we are seeing in Uganda, because Uganda says no, that we don't want to carry LGBTQ. No, no, it's not as if people go to the streets to fight or to have harass LGBTQ people. They don't do that. So it's not as if this thing was happening in Nigeria or Uganda. They don't do that. But Uganda said we cannot make this a government a policy. Let everybody do their sexuality behind closed doors and don't make it a national policy and national pride. Because of that, United States made sure the IMF and the World Bank did not give Uganda access to loan. So this behavior is really disrespectful. It's very disrespectful because the EU and US and the rest of them are thinking that their own way of life is far superior. You hear things like white supremacy. They feel like they are far superior to everybody else, so everybody should behave like them, and therefore they do not have any tolerance for anything that is not like them. And one of the reasons that this thing, if this is very interesting, if this Samoa Act, like I said, we have not seen it, so we do not know. So I'm talking about what I'm discussing is based on the conversations that we're having in the public sphere in Nigeria. If this LGBTQ thing, turning it into um turning if this Samoa Act is all about recognizing the whole LGBTQ thing in Nigeria, if that is what it's all about, huh, and Nigeria signed up. That is very interesting because the current president of Nigeria is a Muslim. His vice president is a Muslim. So even their own religious ideology does not even give room to this thing. Yet they signed it. It shows you that some it shows you that this whole talk of religion and all of those things is just talk. Because at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, is money. Why did Nigeria send? Because it has access to $150 billion. Yes, $150 billion. Because it's not just Nigeria; it's for Africa and the Caribbean. So the EU is giving access to $150 billion if you sign this thing. So you sign away your country's sovereignty. You sign away your country's values. You sign away your country's ideology, your country's principles, your country's culture. You sign everything away because of $150 billion that is going to be shared among a large number of people. And we are not even. I don't. Like I said, I have not read the whole thing, so I don't even know the way this money is being allocated. Do you understand? So even if they are Muslims Islam is more intolerant to this whole thing. Regardless of their personal religious ideology, they went on to sign it. I thought it was I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was very interesting. So in this game of geopolitics, is money. Money makes the world go round. Because Nigeria is many of African countries they are broke. Not because they are broke, because they don't have means to earn money. But like I said during our last episode of the Amanda Show, many of these African countries are broke because of this debt trap. They are owing all over the place. So they are now spending most of what they earn a year, they are spending it servicing their loans. But after servicing their loans, there's nothing left. So they begin to look for money from everywhere to be able to run their government because the service loan, there's nothing left to take care of the health sector in their country, or the educational sector in their country, or anything within their country. So now they're looking for money, extra money from other places. Comes in the EU with the Samoa agreement. What am I trying to say in this segment? That Africa, at this point, poverty and being broke has become existential. Our existence is literally dependent on it. Because if outsiders can come to change your with just a stroke of the pen, because your leaders are looking for money, outsiders can come and impose their own systems on you. That's almost like you don't even have a legislative arm because then they can change your laws. If an outsider can change your laws, you don't have a country. If an outsider can come into your country in the name of money to change your laws, you don't have a country. You don't have a country. So at this point, being broke is an existential issue for Africa. Is we need to not just our government yes, but even we as individuals, we need to begin to say no. I have to. There's a role I have to play in bringing Africa out of this nonsense. It's a mess. And if we don't come in together collectively to fix this problem, I don't see. This thing is not sustainable. How it's not sustainable. It does not sustainable. I don't see how that we would have sovereign countries in Africa in a few years down the road. I don't see it happening at all. This behavior of coming to change our laws and our way of life in Africa, this is the reason it seems like African countries prefer doing business with Russia and China. It's things like this. Because you will not hear the Moscow tell you to begin to behave like them in Moscow. They won't do it. You will not hear Beijing tell you to begin to behave like the Chinese. They won't do it. Russia and China tend to give respect and give regard for your country's culture and values. The same way they give regard for their country's culture and values. So at the end of the day, partnership with Russia and China seems more appealing to African countries because it's respectful. And it's coming from the standpoint of equals. They don't feel like their way of life is more superior to yours. So because it's superior to yours, you have to behave like that. They don't give you lectures. This is the reason why. So when it looks like Africa is eating a lot of I said eating. When it seems like Africa is consuming a lot of Russia and Chinese propaganda, so now Africans are preferring to do business with Russia and China. It's not a propaganda thing. It's things like this. Our leaders don't feel anybody's giving them lectures. Our leaders don't feel anybody feels that their own system is superior to our system. Therefore, they have to impose their system on us. That's the reason. But that out of the way, I want to talk about why we need to take this issue of poverty and being broke in Africa as an existential crisis. We need to bring Africa out of poverty. And one of the most important things to do if we really want to bring Africa out of poverty is to stop paying these loans. Stop, say, just Africa needs to come out and say, we don't have money to service loans. We don't have it. So we're not going to pay our loans again. Not to the IMF, not to the World Bank. Because at the end of the day, if you check, all these loans we have been paying for decades, we have even overpaid. Because maybe we've even overpaid. All these loans we've been paying for decades, we probably even overpaid. So we just come out and say we're not paying again. First point of contact, if Africa wants to pull itself out of poverty, is to extricate itself from all this crony and all these disadvantageous contracts that all our leaders, many before even before now, have signed up to. First thing, Once we stop paying these loans, the next thing we should do is to decide how we can become exporters of finished goods, manufacturing bases. We need to take manufacturing serious. And I'm saying this not because I'm thinking that all the African leaders are watching this show. I'm saying it because of you. You that is watching, how can you get into the manufacturing sector? And how can you do it big? This is how we need to begin to think as Africans. How can we do it big? Do you need to join forces with somebody else? Do you need to join forces with another country? How can we do it big to come into to become industrialized nations? Because if we look through history, when all the countries in the world, the way they came out of poverty was through industries. It wasn't by taking loan. In fact, loan keeps you poor. It wasn't by taking loan. It was through industries. United States had serious industries with their cars. Remember in the era of Ford and the rest of them. United States had serious industries. Look, Europe. When did we have the industrial revolutions? In Europe. They all came from Europe. So how did Europe became rich? Because of the industry. That was how Europe became rich. And then because of that, they could go to other parts of the world. That's why they began to colonize and take resources from those places to also build their wealth. But it was industries. So we in Africa, if we want to become rich, it's industries. How can we set up industries? Now, and I mean, let's begin until our governments come on board. Let's begin to think within ourselves. What can we do? Who do you that is watching? Who do you need to partner with? Which country within the continent do you need help from? These are the ways we should begin to think. Another thing Africa needs to do to come out of poverty is to give preference to local businesses. This idea, somehow I think after decades of a lot of importing and living off imports generally. So now somehow in our subconscious we think that whatever we import is better than locally produced things. That's not true. Give preference to local businesses. Give preference to local businesses. In as much as I'm going to use Netflix as an example, in as much as we all want to do Netflix and chill, we watch Netflix and enjoy the shows. Let's not forget our local streaming platforms. Nigeria, we have something like Iroko, but since Netflix came on board, Iroko has almost disappeared. If we want to become powerhouses and poverty to be a thing of the past, our car industries. I mentioned in the last segment how China is leading the charge with electric vehicles. How can we come in with electric vehicles? How can we come in? Even if industries, even if it's with food, with consumables, even if it's with clothes. So give preference to local business. That's one of the things I'm so excited about what's going on in Nigeria now. Quite right, a lot of challenges are there. But I like that Nigerians are beginning to proudly wear made in Nigerian clothes. And I give credit to President Olusegun Obasanjo because he was the person who insisted. Now, in fact, when he was insisting, a lot of Nigerians insulted him. He said, "We're not going to import clothes into Nigeria. Let us wear made in Nigeria clothes." Today, we wear it proudly. In fact, a lot of Nigerian designers are earning large money. In fact, other people from other countries are even buying clothes made in Nigeria. Do you get where I'm coming from? So local business, even within the makeup section in Nigeria, a lot of Nigerians are buying made in Nigeria, Nigeria owned makeup brands. Nigeria owned makeup brands. Quite that is important, but I know that most of these makeup brands in Nigeria, although they are Nigerian owned, but the industries are in China. So they are making the makeup interesting. They are making the makeup in China and then branding it and selling it here. But we also want us to get because I said that because Nigeria is beginning to show signs that they are open to welcoming Nigeria owned goods made by Nigerian businesses. So as we open ourselves to that, let also begin to look at how can we set up these industries. How can we do our makeup industries in Nigeria? How can we do our makeup industries in South Africa? How can we do it in Congo? How can we do it in Rwanda? How can we do it in Mozambique? So these are the things we need to think. By the time we stop paying loans, that money our government has, the money instead of servicing all those loans, because I think by now we have probably over serviced them. Instead of servicing all those loans, that those monies that we get from that, the government can put it into different things within the countries. Number one. Number two, let us as individuals, the public in Africa, make up our mind that within 20 years, What we are going to focus on is setting up industries within the continent. Let's not wait for our government. Number two, number three, then we need to do protect our local businesses. If we can do these things, that is how it's one foot in front of the other. I'm not saying we'll do it today and tomorrow we are the richest countries in the world, even if I would like that. But that's not the way it works. But it's one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. Before you can say Jack Robinson, we've transformed the continent. So by the time we become rich nations, outsiders will not now dangle pennies in front of us. At the end of the day, getting us to sign away our sovereignty. They will not use pennies to get us to sign deals that are contrary to our cultures, our values, our principles within the continent. Because at the end of the day, see those values, those cultures, those principles are what make you you. They are what make Ghana Ghana. They are what make Tunisia Tunisia. They are what make Sudan Sudan. They are what make Kenya Kenya. They are what make Cameroon Cameroon. It's those values. We need to protect them. But if you're broke, anybody can get you to do any stupid thing and you sign away your sovereignty and your country in general. So that's it for this episode of the Amanda Show. As usual, let me know your opinion in the comment section below. Whether it's with the United States getting the DRC or trying to cajole the DRC not to sell a mine to China, or it's with the G7 diamond ban against Russia and how it affects African countries. Or maybe it's even about this Samoa agreement in Nigeria that allegedly makes a provision for Nigeria to recognize LGBTQ rights. Let me know what you think about each of these topics in the comment section below. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Amanda Akalonu, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.